They thought they were just skipping another one of my little events. That's what my parents always called anything that wasn't about my brother. My school performances, my debates, even my college graduation. To them, his football games were the center of the universe, while my milestones were cute distractions. So when they texted me that morning saying, "Sorry, honey, we can't make your event tonight. Your brother's got a big game. You understand, right?" I stared at the screen, my fingers shaking, because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that the event they were brushing off wasn't some recital or minor party. It was the most important day of my life, my wedding. And the moment they realized what they had truly missed, I knew everything between us would never, ever be the same. I grew up knowing my place in the family, invisible unless my brother wasn't around. He was the star athlete, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, and I was the quiet daughter who got good grades but never drew much attention. My parents built their entire schedules around his practices, his tournaments, his weekend games, and his endless career in sports that never actually happened past high school. Every dinner conversation circled back to him. How many touchdowns? What college scouts might think? Which coach was unfair? Meanwhile, I learned to fade into the background, to clap politely when he scored, to swallow my pride when my own victories went unnoticed. When I graduated from college, they skipped the ceremony because he had a summer league match out of state. When I won a local award for my community work, they told me they were proud but couldn't attend the ceremony because he had training. It became a pattern. My life was always rescheduled around him. So when I got engaged to a man who adored me for who I was, I decided something. I wasn't going to beg my family for attention anymore. I told them I had an important event coming up. I didn't spell it out. I didn't beg them to come. I simply said, "It's happening on this date at this time. I hope you'll be there." I watched my mother's face flicker when she read it, like she was already calculating whether my brother had a game. And sure enough, days later came that text. A cold dismissal disguised as a polite apology. "We can't make it tonight. Your brother's got a big game. You understand." I understood perfectly. They hadn't even asked what the event was. They assumed it couldn't be as important as his football. And so, on that sunny afternoon, I walked down the aisle in a lace gown, holding the arm of a friend instead of my father. I smiled at my fiancé, my now husband, and vowed my love while my parents cheered in bleachers miles away, oblivious. They missed my wedding, the one moment that should have mattered more than any ball game. And I didn't tell them until it was over, because sometimes the only way to show people how little they value you is to let them see exactly what they've thrown away when the ceremony ended and I looked around at the people who had chosen to be there, friends who had stood by me for years, my husband's family who welcomed me without hesitation, coworkers who rearranged their schedules to show up. I felt a mixture of heartbreak and clarity. There were empty seats where my parents should have been, where my brother should have been, where a family should have sat proud and supportive. Instead, those seats stayed vacant, reminding me that I had built my life on hoping for people to change who never would. After the reception, I posted a single photo online, me in my dress, holding my bouquet, my husband kissing my cheek. The caption was simple: "Best day of my life." Within an hour, my phone buzzed nonstop. My mother called 3 times in a row. My father texted, "Wait, today?" My brother, ever self-centered, wrote, "Why wouldn't you tell us it was your wedding?" And I sat there, scrolling through their sudden panic, their guilt poorly hidden behind excuses, and I laughed for the first time that day. Because I had told them. I had told them something important was happening. They didn't care enough to ask what. My mother left me a voicemail, crying, saying they never would have missed it if they had known. My father followed up with a long text about how I blindsided them, how family deserves honesty. And my brother, he had the audacity to complain that I'd ruined his big game night because apparently the news had spread and people were asking why his parents weren't at their daughter's wedding. For once, it wasn't me in the shadow. It was him. The golden boy caught in the fallout of their neglect. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to chase after people who saw me as a placeholder. My wedding day became more than a vow to my husband. It was a vow to myself, too. A promise that I would never again shrink so someone else could shine. The fallout didn't stop with a few frantic calls and texts. The next morning, when I woke up in the little hotel suite my husband had booked for us, I found my inbox flooded with long emails from my parents. My mom wrote pages about how she felt betrayed, how she wished I had been clearer. How I had put her in an impossible position because, of course, we would have chosen you over a game if we'd known. But I read her words with the clarity of someone who had lived the truth. If they had cared enough, they would have asked. They never did. My dad's email was even worse. He accused me of humiliating the family, of making them look careless in front of relatives who were now gossiping about how my own parents skipped my wedding. He demanded I fix it by telling everyone I'd kept it a secret and that it wasn't their fault. And my brother? He sent me a one-line text. "Way to be dramatic, sis." That was the moment I realized just how deep their denial ran. To them, my pain didn't matter. Only their image did. The irony was delicious. For years, I had been the invisible one, the afterthought, the background player. But suddenly, everyone was talking about me. Relatives who had never reached out before messaged me privately, saying they couldn't believe my parents had missed such a milestone. Friends who had seen the photo shared it, writing captions like, "She deserved better." My parents couldn't control the narrative anymore. They couldn't erase what they had chosen to miss. And for once, my brother wasn't the center of attention. My wedding was. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't correct the gossip. I didn't soften the blow. I let them sit with the truth, that they had chosen bleachers over their own daughter, and no spin could undo it. That silence, my refusal to play into their excuses, was the loudest statement I had ever made. A week later, when the dust still hadn't settled, they showed up at my apartment unannounced. My husband answered the door first, standing tall in the frame like he was protecting me, and I stayed seated on the couch, listening as my parents pushed past him into the living room like they still had that right. My mom's eyes darted immediately to the framed wedding photo on the wall, me in my gown, radiant and happy, surrounded by people who had chosen to love me, and she froze, her face twisting between guilt and indignation. My dad, however, went straight into lecture mode. "You blindsided us," he said, his voice sharp. "Family deserves to know. Family deserves a chance." I let him finish before I stood, smoothed my dress, and looked them both in the eyes. "Family deserves to ask," I replied quietly. "Family deserves to care enough to know the difference between a recital and a wedding." My mom's lip trembled as she whispered that she never thought I'd actually go through with it without them. That line nearly broke me, because it showed exactly how little they valued me. They thought I was bluffing, like my entire life was some plea for their attention. But I hadn't bluffed. I had built something real without them. My husband took my hand and said firmly, "We're not doing this." That simple sentence cut the air. He wasn't just defending me, he was drawing a line they couldn't cross. My dad sputtered. My mom tried to guilt me with tears, but for the first time in my life, I didn't bend. I told them calmly that their absence had been their choice, that I wasn't going to rewrite the story for their convenience, that their seats had been empty, and that was on them. And then, with a finality that made my chest ache but also filled me with strength, I opened the door and asked them to leave. They left in silence, my mom glancing back once, my dad storming past without another word. And as the door clicked shut, I felt something I'd never felt before. Freedom. After that confrontation, my parents tried new tactics. When guilt didn't work, they shifted to anger, sending messages dripping with blame. "You've destroyed this family. You've embarrassed us. How dare you shut us out?" Then, when anger didn't shake me, they turned to pity plays. Long voicemails about how my mom couldn't sleep, how my dad felt like a failure, how they just wanted to start over. But the truth was, they didn't want to start over. They wanted me to erase what had happened, to pretend their absence hadn't scarred me. For years, I had given into those cycles: guilt, anger, pity. This time I didn't. I blocked their calls. I muted their emails. The only person I didn't block was my brother, but only because I wanted to see just how far his arrogance could go. And he didn't disappoint. A month after my wedding, he sent me a photo of himself holding a football trophy, captioned, "At least someone in this family achieves things worth celebrating." I stared at it, equal parts furious and oddly relieved, because his message confirmed everything I had always known, that my worth would never matter to them as much as his mediocre victories. But here's the thing. By then, I had already begun building a new circle. My husband's parents invited us for Sunday dinners. His sisters helped me with little things, like hemming dresses or swapping recipes. My coworkers checked in on me, brought me coffee, asked about my honeymoon. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I didn't need my parents' approval when I had people who chose to show up. And slowly, the hurt transformed into resolve. Their absence had been painful, yes, But it had also been the gift I didn't know I needed. Because the moment they didn't walk through those church doors was the moment I realized I didn't need to wait for them anymore. The turning point came when an aunt from my dad's side called me one evening. She wasn't someone I'd been particularly close with growing up, but she had seen the photo online and reached out in a hushed, almost conspiratorial tone. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "Everyone is talking about what your parents did. Nobody can believe they missed your wedding. And honestly, a lot of us aren't surprised." That stopped me cold. She went on to tell me that my parents had always bragged about my brother, always downplayed me, even at family gatherings where I wasn't present. "They made it sound like you were just background," she admitted, and the words both stung and validated everything I had felt for years. But then she added something else. "Now they're embarrassed. And they should be." I hung up the phone realizing I wasn't alone. People had seen what I had lived through in silence. My parents' favoritism wasn't just my private wound, it was their public shame now. From then on, I stopped feeling like the abandoned daughter and started feeling like someone who had broken free. I leaned harder into my new family, my marriage, my friendships. I threw myself into projects at work where people actually acknowledged my effort. I started hosting dinners in our apartment, filling the room with laughter, with chosen family who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. Meanwhile, my parents grew quieter. The calls slowed. The emails trickled off. My brother posted less about football and more vague, bitter things about betrayal. And through it all, I felt lighter, like a weight had finally lifted. Because I had given them the opportunity to show up for me, and they hadn't. And instead of chasing them, I had chosen myself. That was my real wedding vow, the one I made silently, deep inside, that I would never again live my life begging for scraps of love that should have been freely given. Months passed, and as the seasons shifted, I began to notice just how different life felt, without the constant weight of my parents' approval hanging over me. It was strange at first, quiet in a way I wasn't used to, but the silence was healing. My husband and I decorated our apartment together, picking out colors and furniture that felt like us, not like something I had to defend or justify to anyone. I spent my weekends with people who wanted to be there, who didn't keep a scoreboard of who deserved more attention. For the first time, I was free to live without comparison, without feeling like a shadow. But of course, my parents couldn't stay away forever. Around the holidays, my mom reached out again, framing her message like a peace offering. She wrote about how Christmas wasn't the same without me, how they missed me at the table, how my brother had asked about me. It sounded sweet on the surface, but beneath it I could read the same subtext. She wanted me back so things could go back to the way they had always been. She wanted me sitting quietly while the conversation revolved around my brother's latest practice or his new coaching gig. My dad followed up a few days later with a more blunt email. "We're family. We fight, but we get over it. Don't let one mistake ruin everything." One mistake. That was the phrase that sent me over the edge. Because what they had done wasn't a mistake. It was a lifetime of choices. It was decades of dismissing me, diminishing me, overlooking me. Missing my wedding was simply the loudest, clearest symbol of what had always been true. I was never going to matter as much as my brother in their eyes. And I refused to let them call that a mistake. I sat down that night and wrote them a letter. Not out of anger, but out of finality. I told them that missing my wedding wasn't just one day. It was every day before it, too. It was every graduation, every ceremony, every milestone where they chose him instead of me. I told them that family isn't defined by blood, but by presence, by love, by effort. And then I wrote the hardest line of all, "You chose your son. I chose myself." That's the end of it. I sealed it, mailed it, and felt the strangest mix of grief and relief as I let it go. And when no reply came, when weeks turned into months of silence, I knew they had read it. I knew they had felt the sting. And maybe for the first time in their lives, they realized they couldn't spin the story to make themselves the victims. They had to sit with the truth. Time has a way of exposing what people are really made of. By the next year, word had spread through the extended family, and the dynamic shifted in ways my parents never expected. At birthdays, at weddings of cousins, people whispered about them. I could feel the looks when my aunt leaned in to tell me, "We were shocked, but honestly, it made sense." They've always put him first. My parents had built their reputation on being the perfect supportive family, but their absence at my wedding had cracked that facade wide open. They couldn't cover it up no matter how hard they tried. Relatives started reaching out to me more often, not to gossip, but to quietly show support. They invited me and my husband to gatherings, even when my parents weren't there. I felt the shift. I wasn't invisible anymore. My story had been heard. Meanwhile, my brother grew bitter. He called me one night, his voice dripping with resentment, accusing me of ruining everything for him. He said recruiters had even asked why his parents missed his sister's wedding, like it was a mark against his family values. I listened, calm and steady, and told him, "You're angry at the wrong person. If our parents had cared enough, they would have been there. That's not on me." He hung up on me, but I didn't feel shaken the way I once would have. His anger no longer pierced me. It bounced off. Because I had built something stronger around myself. My husband and I celebrated our first anniversary with a quiet dinner. No drama, no guilt. I realized then that peace felt foreign but addictive. And every time my phone buzzed with another attempt from my parents, holiday messages, "we miss you" texts, carefully worded apologies that never truly took responsibility, I chose silence. Not out of cruelty, but out of protection. Because the truth was, my life had never been fuller. My absence from them had finally taught me presence with myself. By the time our second year of marriage rolled around, I barely recognized the woman I used to be, the one who waited by the phone hoping her parents would notice her, who rearranged her life to fit around her brother's endless schedule, who swallowed her hurt in order to keep the peace. That version of me felt like a ghost I had finally laid to rest. What replaced her was someone who no longer begged for scraps of affection, someone who had built a life where love flowed freely and wasn't conditional on being the family doormat. But just as I was finally learning to breathe without them, my parents made one last desperate move. Out of nowhere, I received a certified letter in the mail. For a moment, my heart dropped, thinking maybe something serious had happened. Instead, when I tore it open, I found a long typed plea from my father, laced with guilt and arrogance all at once. He wrote that they wanted to repair the family name, that it was time to move on from what he continued to call a misunderstanding, and that I needed to come home for dinner so we could set things straight. The kicker? He ended the letter with, "Bring your husband, but please no photos this time." No photos. As if the only problem with them missing my wedding was that the world had seen the proof. As if their reputation, not my heart, had been the real casualty. I laughed, then I cried, then I laughed again. Because even in their attempt at reconciliation, they proved they hadn't changed at all. They weren't apologizing, they were managing optics. I didn't reply. Instead, I tucked the letter away in a drawer as a reminder of what I'd left behind. That weekend, instead of going home to them, I hosted a dinner in my own home. Our apartment filled with people who wanted to be there. Friends, co-workers, my husband's family. We ate, we laughed, we toasted to small victories and big dreams. At one point, I looked around the table and realized something profound. I had always had a family. It just didn't look like the one I was born into. It was the one I had chosen, the one that chose me back. My parents never showed up, not for my wedding, not for me, and eventually, not even for themselves. And by the time they realized what they had lost, it was too late. Years later, when I looked back on it all, the sting of that day was still there but dulled, reshaped into something sharper and cleaner. Clarity. I had built a marriage on love instead of conditions, on presence instead of performance. My husband and I bought a small house together, one with a garden I could fill with roses and lavender, and every time I planted something new, I thought about how much beauty could bloom when you stopped pouring water into dry soil that would never give back. My parents remained on the edges of my life, occasionally sending holiday cards signed with both their names, but never containing the words that mattered. Never, "we were wrong." Never, "we're sorry." Never, "we should have been there." My brother faded too. Football glory slipped through his fingers, and without an audience, he didn't know who he was anymore. I sometimes heard through relatives that he resented me still, that he blamed me for shifting the spotlight away. But I knew better. The truth was, my parents had done that to themselves when they chose a game over my vows. Their seats had been empty not just in that church, but in my life. Again and again. Until I finally stopped saving them a place. And here's the part I never expected. Instead of breaking me, their absence made room for everything I deserved. Friends became family. My husband became my safe harbor. I became someone who no longer chased love, but accepted it where it was freely given. And maybe that was the real revenge, not screaming, not begging, not proving a point, but living a life so full, so rich, so unapologetically mine that their absence no longer mattered. When people ask me if I regret not telling them outright it was my wedding, I answer the same way every time. If they had cared, they would have asked. And that's all anyone needs to know. On our 5th anniversary, sitting at the head of a long table surrounded by friends, my husband's family, and colleagues who had become like siblings, I realized how far I had come. The house was full of laughter, the smell of roasted garlic and wine, music playing low in the background. These were people who showed up without being begged, who didn't need to be tricked into caring. And yet, in moments like this, I couldn't help but imagine the contrast. What it would have looked like if my parents had ever chosen me the way these people did. The truth was, by then, my parents and I were nothing more than ghosts in each other's lives. I hadn't seen them in years, and the last interaction had been a hollow card on my birthday with $50 tucked inside, as if that could bridge the canyon they'd created. Relatives still whispered about the wedding, even after all that time. At gatherings, when my name came up, my parents shifted uncomfortably, my brother rolled his eyes, and the subject was quickly changed. The story had become a family legend, the kind that clung to them like smoke they couldn't wash off. And it wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about the decades of favoritism, the choices they made over and over again. The wedding was only the day the world finally saw it too. But here's what struck me most in those years. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't even feel the old ache of wanting them to change. Instead, I felt distance, almost like looking at strangers. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. My life wasn't missing anything. I had the love I needed, the family I had built, the peace I had fought for. Their absence no longer defined me. My freedom did. And though they might never understand it, the greatest revenge I ever took was refusing to chase them again, refusing to leave that empty chair waiting for them. Because I finally understood. Love is only real when it shows up, and they never did. In the end, I stopped replaying the what-ifs and started living in the what-is. My wedding had been the day they revealed who they truly were, but my marriage, my friendships, and the life I've built since have been the proof of who I became without them. I don't carry their absence like a wound anymore. I carry it like a reminder that sometimes the people meant to protect you will leave you standing alone. And sometimes that's the very push you need to discover your own strength. My parents missed my vows, but I didn't. I vowed to myself that day to never again shrink to fit inside their shadow. And I've kept that promise every single day since. The empty chairs at my wedding no longer haunt me. They freed me. They showed me that blood might bind us, but choice is what makes a family. And I chose myself. I chose love that showed up, love that stayed, love that didn't ask me to prove my worth. If they ever ask me now why I did it, why I didn't spell it out for them, I'll say the same thing I've said before. If you have to be told when to care, then you never cared at all. And that is the truth I've made peace with. My revenge was never about punishing them. It was about walking away, building a life so full they could never take credit for it, and finally understanding that the only approval I ever needed was my own.